All right, well, today we are back to work on the C6 competition drift car build. We've been making a lot of progress on this thing. We're cruising right along, and we got plenty more work to do. We just got to get to it. So if you haven't been following along for the last couple episodes, we've got our entire driveline mocked up in here. We've got our Winner's quick change differential, our G-Force GSR 4-speed dog box transmission, made it to our QuickTime bell housing, and then to our Borowski 427 LS. Which is going to be going turbo and stuff. So we've got a turbo kit to build, and we've got some things to figure out. So some of this stuff's going to have to come back out, but we need as much of it in here to start building around it and making decisions and coming up with how we're going to do things, so on and so forth. So one of the things we need to figure out is the accessory drive. I want to mock up an alternator and see if we're going to be able to fit a low-mounted alternator, because that is drastically going to vary how exactly we're going to be able to build our turbo kit, if we're going to be able to come up and forward with both headers to the turbo, if we're going to have to go down, under, and over. We're hoping we can avoid that, but I can't find any certainty on if an alternator fits down here with the steering rack. So that's one of the things we need to figure out. We need to build a trans mount. We've kind of figured out what our driveline angle is. So if you're unfamiliar with vets, normally they came with the transmission back here. We have put the transmission up here. So there's no supporting infrastructure up there for a trans mount, so we're gonna have to build tabs, the mount, etc. So we got a lot of work ahead of us. Just the general gist of what we're gonna be working on. Who knows what direction it'll go. We're just gonna do everything we can. So that being said, I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering and we're gonna get to work. So the first thing I wanted to do was figure out this accessory drive situation. This has been a burning question on my mind for a couple months now, and I thought I was gonna have to order an alternator to test fit, but then it dawned on me, wait a second, I have a spare in the trailer for the LS Miata. We had one go bad at a comp round. We were able to get one. We got it changed in time, but it wasn't the right one. We got the other one back on. We would have been able to keep competing if we had a spare. So right after that round, I bought a spare. We've got a brand new F-body one. Perfect. All right, let's see if this works. Putting it in place, and man, yeah, it's not even close. It's not like, oh, it goes in there, it almost fits, but it's a little tight. Maybe we could clearance. I mean, it just won't even try to go in. So I decided, you know what, let me check this setup out. This car came with a motor plate with a JZ alternator, so let me see how that looks. So I test fitted in there, and first off, the JZ alternator is on the wrong side. It's on the dry sump side. Secondly, the motor plate doesn't even fit to begin with. So, okay, scratch that. Let's just see if the JZ alternator would fit down here if I were to make a custom bracket with a turnbuckle tensioner and do all that. And even same thing. It's not like it's going in place, but it just doesn't, it's not even close. There's just not enough room to fit an alternator there. All right, well, even trying both alternators, the JZ one is definitely considerably smaller than the LS one. And this is the F-body style LS one, so it's the smallest. The vet one and the truck ones are bigger. But neither of them are gonna fit. Maybe this one, we might tinker with it, like lift the engine up and move the engine around. I think maybe we could fit the smaller one if we move the engine back, but it seems like it would have to go in and then you put the engine in, which means there'd be no way to replace the alternator in a hurry, which not good. Alternators go bad. We had one go bad. That's why I had a spare. So I don't know. We're looking into options. So there's a few. My main reason for wanting to put it down there is for the turbo kit, so we can go forward with both headers to the turbo up here. The other option was go down, run a crossover tube under, and then it would have to come up under this header and then up to the turbo. Now that wouldn't be such a problem, except for the dry sumps here. So we've got multiple lines. We've got a feed, a 16AN feed, a dual 16AN returns, and then a 12AN outlet, all coming out. So 4 big lines coming out of this location. So if we've got a header here and then another pipe, it's gonna get tight in a hurry. Now I do have these Earl's fittings that basically, instead of threading onto the fitting that threads into the pump, they bypass this. They thread straight into the pump. So they're gonna be really low profile for a 16 and should keep us down here pretty low. And I think we'd be able to keep the lines out of the way, but just not an ideal setup to have so much stuff on this one side. The starter's here as well, so we probably have to pull the crossover to get the starter out. Not my favorite option, which is why I'm so adamant I'm trying to fit an alternator here. But you know, Sway just came up with another option. If we did a high mount alternator and just the alternator only, we might be able to build a header that comes down and through this pocket and then up to the turbo. So there's some options. We're in the look and ponder part of the build. You know, this is stuff that I've been thinking about for a couple months now as we've been getting this chassis, getting a cage, getting all the stuff done. So now it's like we finally get to look at it and see it, not just looking at pictures trying to figure all this stuff out. We got the engine and trans in here. But other than that, we'll have to come back to that. I want to go ahead and pull the trans back out, make sure it comes out in the car. We do have some clearancing to do over there. It's just touching on one side, but I am glad it kind of went in as one unit. Shifter location's good. So anyway, I'm jibber jabbering. We're figuring things out. We're gonna go ahead and yank the trans back out. We still got to index the bell housing. We'll have to pull the engine back out. It's gonna be a lot of doing and undoing, but just trying to figure out as many things as we can with all this stuff in position. So yeah, let's see if we can get this trans out in the car and how difficult it is. So we started working on yanking this thing out, and it was easy and struggle at the same time. So the overall pulling the trans out in the car wasn't too bad. We went ahead and yanked this last bolt out. It became free, but it was just a little bit bound up. We don't have the indexing dowels yet to perfectly center the bell housing, and the clutch is a quad disc, so any bit of variation there, it wants to get tight and get kind of stuck in there. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to pull it back out. But again, the main thing was to see how it was going to come out in the car. Now, mind you, we still have some clearancing to do. So, you know, the idea was if it comes out easy now, we shouldn't have any problem taking it out, you know, in the grass at the track once everything's got the last little bit of clearance. So we get this thing out. You have to kind of angle it down aggressively because the trans tunnel tightens up so much, but once you get the angle right and get it kind of below the center of the tunnel, not too bad at all. So we slide that thing out, and then we decide to pull the engine out. So I wanted to go ahead and get the bell housing off, take the clutch off so that we could mock the trans back up in the car without worrying about any of the clutch discs getting misaligned or having to fight that or anything. Now, we obviously want to know that we'll be able to get it in with the clutch in, but we're not really going to be able to determine that until we get the dowels and we properly index the bell housing. We have everything 100% lined up. So just for the sake of simplicity and mock-up, I decided to go ahead and pull the clutch back off again and just get it out of the way so that way we could easily drop everything back in, mock things up in the car, no problem. So we went ahead and put the engine back in again. Now, obviously, we could have put it back in with the trans on, but same as wanting to see if the trans comes out in the car, we want to make sure we can get it in the car. Just covering all our bases and making sure there's not any more we need to do to the trans tunnel to make this work. A big part of the idea of doing this trans in the front is being able to easily service it at the track. All right, big moment here. Got the bolts for the shifter. I got bolts that are way too long, so I'll have to get shorter ones. But these shifters are so stiff that, like, you have to have the shift lever on there to try to shift it. I want to say the shorter ones it was like the same price for 5 as it was for 25 of these, because these must be more common. But this is like the only thing I'm ever going to use these on. Fine, they're at 3/8. I don't know why they don't make everything metric. All right, here we go, boy. About to see what it feels like to be a real man. Shifter height should be good. Probably be up.
Be a little higher.
Yeah, like right here.
So it probably feels a little high now. Like you're chilling in the bathtub.
Right. That'll probably be somewhere around here. Yeah, so that's a good spot. We can put the handbrake just right here. I just wanted to see that.
Oh yeah.
Gets me hyped. So with the trans back in, I had started to get an idea of how the trans mount was going to go, how it was going to be built. I really didn't have a plan before because I couldn't really remember where the mount ended up. So with that in mind, I realized I was going to for sure have to drill these heat shields out. I didn't want to because we'd already painted over them, but one of those things we had to. So we drilled the rivets out, got those out of the way. All right, well, we haven't really made a whole lot of forward progress, but we have figured a lot of things out. So we got the trans mocked up back in here, and we did verify that we can easily pull the trans out in the car, pop it in the car, no problem. So with the way I built this engine mount, you can loosen the front bolt, loosen that one, get the engine to tilt all the way till the valve covers hit the firewall, which makes the angle of attack a lot better because the tunnel necks down a lot. So super stoked on that. We hadn't really fully installed the trans in the other car after way more cutting and grinding. So the fact that we're able to get it in and out without having to slot the side of the trans tunnel or anything, I am super stoked. Huge relief. So we've got it mocked up back in here. Got those heat shields out because we're probably going to build the trans mount down to up to these basically. It might be really easy. So that's one thing we need to work on. We got it all mocked back up in here so we can do that. We do have all the stuff coming tomorrow that we need to fully assemble the clutch on, index the bell housing, get the throwout bearing in there, and we could be done with this, but we wanted to toss it back in so we could start working on the trans mount. But before we even do that, one of the things is the fuel cell mounting. So this was mounted previously way back here behind the diff, and I mean, it was in the danger zone. Like, you get into any big rear end wreck and you're crushing the fuel cell. So I wasn't a fan of that, not to mention weight balance. Now, we do want pretty much as much rear bias as we can get, but if you start going back behind the axle with your weight, you start getting a pendulum effect where the back just always wants to overtake the front. So we want it kind of more towards the center / over the axle. So this is kind of where we're looking at mounting the fuel cell. It's really our only other option. The problem is the radiator goes here. The radiator's got to draw air from this area, so there's some question marks here. The firewall and so on and so forth. So this is something we're going to try to figure out so we can start making a mount. So yeah, we need to get the firewall in, get this mocked up, get the radiator in, we got to get our brackets. So yeah, a little more staring and pondering before we start doing some actual work. But you know, one of those things, part of it. So the first thing to reinstall was the firewall. This will be the first time this thing has gone back in, actually, since we painted the chassis. So we taped up the roll cage bars. They would get scratched up on the way in. Otherwise, it's a little bit tricky to get this thing in. It doesn't fit perfect, which is pretty common with molded stuff. But we wanted to drill a few holes, put a couple of Clecos in just to hold this thing in place. There's nothing worse than test fitting against something that's moving around and then you don't realize it wasn't in place, and yeah, it can be a mess. So we got that thing Clecoed in. We got the fuel cell set back in here. Now, luckily, the fuel cell kind of just sits in the rough area we want it to be in, so we don't really have to prop it up with anything. We can just kind of set it in there, especially for something like this where we're just eyeballing fitment on a bunch of different parts together. So these brackets are off the other car, which they're for 1 3/4 roll cage tubing. However, on this car, we have 1.5 roll cage tubing. So Josue came up with the idea to tape some cardboard around just as kind of a spacer. Obviously, we're not going to use it like this, but it's a good way to get them in there, get them bolted up so that we can test fit the radiator and see how all of this is going to look. See if there's a fighting chance that the radiator is going to fit with the fuel cell mounted where we need to mount it. So we get it roughly bolted up, and it honestly fits pretty decent. I'm impressed. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be, that's for sure. All right, well, we finally have some clear direction on what exactly we need to work on and when and now. Again, we've been scratching our heads a little bit trying to figure out where we wanted to start with this thing. And super happy to see that everything fits good back here. So we've got the radiator down pretty much as low as it can go, keep our center of gravity low, keep the weight right over the axle. We've got plenty of room to get to our fuel cell. We can still get to the hat if we needed to service the pumps at the track. You know, we got room with our firewall Clecoed in here. Everything fits good. So I'm really stoked about that. That was another big head scratching moment. Is the fuel cell gonna fit here with the diff and the radiator and the firewall? And it does. It's gonna be up a tiny bit higher than this. It's sitting on the diff right now, but we're good. So we can start building our fuel cell mount. Again, we can start building our trans mount. But another big question mark of the accessory drive, we're gonna be able to figure that out as well. So this is a real oddball setup because it being in a vet, you're very limited on room. Then on top of that, you know, we're not running a regular water pump, we're running a remote electric water pump, so then we lose the whole pulley here. So it starts to become very difficult to get an accessory drive figured out. So luckily, I met the guys at ICT Billet when I was at LS Fest. Awesome group of guys, and I reached out to them and was like, look, kind of at a loss here. I don't really know what's gonna work on this. And they sent me a few different options to try. And not only did they send them to me, but they got them here lightning fast. Because again, order of operations, there's a lot of stuff we can't do until we get this accessory drive situation figured out. And this is something that's required. We have to have an accessory drive for this car to work, you know? So this is one of those burning question marks in my mind I really want to get answered. So huge shout out to ICT Billet. I cannot thank them enough. They got us out of a bind here for sure. So let's open this box and start testing some of these on and see what we want to do. We got a few kits here. This is kind of part of the game when you're in a time crunch, man. You can't just order one and then it doesn't work, and then wait to order the other, and then it doesn't work. You gotta have options if you want to get things done quickly. Part of it. So huge shout out to them. I mean, they had all this stuff in stock. They literally got this to me in one freaking day. Beyond stoked. So, yeah, we got to figure out. I think this is the one I want to start with. Yeah, this is the one I want to start with. If this fits, we'll be in good shape. I don't know if it'll fit. It's going to be tight. But this is the main one. If this doesn't work, I think it's this one, and then we got these two. So we started unpacking the first option. I really like how they package this stuff. It keeps everything separate, everything organized, makes it really easy to sort stuff out. It's not just all jumbled up in one place. So we started installing this one on the engine, and immediately it was not looking great. So we kind of tinkered with it some, played around with it, and tried to get an idea of if there was any way we could make this fit. If it was definitely not going to fit as it was intended. All right, so option one. My favorite option is not gonna fit. Basically, we just don't have enough width between the frame rails here to widen it up. This bolt needs to go where this bolt is right now. We're also hitting the head stud here with this plastic housing. Now, we may be able to modify this to make it work, but the problem is we have just enough room, so we wouldn't be able to do any sort of tensioner. Well, the reason I really wanted to use this one was because it is adjustable. So basically you can put the belt on and then just slide it like an old school alternator, tighten the bolt down, which is perfect for a situation like this where we're only gonna have one thing on our belt. So we're gonna shelve this one for now. We're gonna move on to the next one. We're gonna go over here now and see what that's looking like. The reason I like this one also is because we could build the header above it very easily. I mean, this back section would get a little tight, but we could build the header out over and then to our turbo and save all our room down here for our dry sump. So on to option number two. Now this obviously moves the alternator to the driver's side as well as high mounting it. So it puts it up really high and above the frame rail, which is very similar to how it's factory mounted in the vet. So we knew this kit would most likely work and most likely fit, but it wasn't my first choice because of A, building the turbo kit, and B, just aesthetics, honestly. All right, here's option two. This is the safest option in the sense that it definitely fits. Now, the setup that was on this car before was similar. It put the alternator here, but this one tucks it way closer to the valve cover, keeps it up off of here. The other one had it like literally out here, and the belt was rubbing on the frame rail. So this is a much nicer setup, a big improvement. So my idea with this was bring the header down either here or down in this pocket and then come over to the turbo. Now, what I didn't think about enough is the belt. Now we could come this way up over the steering column. That might work, actually. That might work. Let's grab a collector. This is a 2.5 inch collector. So let's say we even move it back here. I mean, that would fit. And then we basically come out of here and then up into the turbo, which will be somewhere over here. We also have a header kit to do 3 inch. Wow. Look at the size difference of building a kit with 1 3/4 primaries to 2.5 versus 1 7/8 primaries to 3 inch. Jeez. Yeah, that gets a whole lot tighter for sure. But that's an option. Down here, not looking so much like an option, just because of the belt. So if that's an option, then we need to try this kit. So this kit, instead of also only, has a power steering pump. Now, there's still things to figure out here. This is designed to go to a water pump with a tensioner, which if we don't have that, we don't have a tensioner. But this is good. This is good. So let's get this one off. Let's get the one with power steering on and see what that looks like. So this one was definitely a bit of a long shot. I was hopeful that it might work because it would give us the option to revert back to a mechanical power steering pump. I want to try electric because it simplifies things with the accessory drive and the room in the engine bay because we only have to have an alternator. However, it would be nice to have the option to put a power steering pump on if we had issues with the electrical, we didn't like the feel, or so on and and so forth. So I wanted to see if with this setup on there mocked up, if we could still build the header the same way and we wouldn't have to rebuild it if we converted to this setup. But I didn't have the right power steering pump to fully test it, but just eyeballing it, it was not looking very feasible. It didn't seem like something that was going to work. So then we move on to our last and final option. This one's kind of like a Hail Mary throw. I wasn't sure it was going to work or be the best option, but I wanted to try it. You really can't tell with this kind of stuff until you see it in position and start mocking up around it and looking at what kind of room you have. So this one actually fits on there really well. It fits really well in the engine bay, keeps the alternator high, gives us lots of room. It's actually looking pretty promising. All right, well, I really like this. I just put the ratchet up, but it might look weird right now. That's the tensioner maxed out. If we get a shorter belt that just barely squeezes on with the tensioner all the way down here, it'll put it about midway, keeps the belt up here for 1, gives us a tensioner for 2, 3 keeps it from being, in the way here or over here, keeps the belt all to one side. I really like this setup. At first, I wasn't too fond of it aesthetically, but it honestly looks good on there. It fits good. I think that's gonna work perfect. Should be below our throttle body and everything. So as of right now, I think this is what we're gonna go with. This is what I'm leaning towards. We still have time to decide before we start building the kit, but this is definitely my favorite option. So the only thing that it inhibits is my plan was to run the downpipe this way out the fender. But one, that's not FD legal. So if we went to FD, if we took the car to FD, which the plan is to be able to do that someday, we would have to rebuild it. Now we could go down through here, kind of how they did it on the other car. Not my favorite option though. But with this there, we can't go that way at all. So over here, we build that header low, build this header high. We should be able to snake some oval piping down this way and down this side, which this side has more room next to the trans anyway, out the back. Bob's your uncle. So I think this is what we're gonna go with, and we'll probably, hopefully build exhaust all the way out the back, which would be great for a long term. So yeah, sweet. All right, we got that figured out. Now it's time to get to work. I'm gonna start building the trans mount. Josue's gonna start working on the fuel cell mounting bracket box thing. Let's get to it. So I finally started on building the trans mount. Now the first thing I had to do was drill out these spot welds for these little brackets that were right where I wanted to land my transmission mount. Of course they couldn't be anywhere else, so we got those drilled out, and then there's a little lip from the ribbing that was there that we needed to grind down just to give the transmission mount a good flat spot to lay on. All this stuff was just kind of in the way. So we got all that cleaned up and it was time to start building the mount. So obviously we need to cut the shape out. We got this really thick rectangle tubing. It's 1.5 by 1.5 inch, 3/16 wall, so it is some beefy stuff, and we got a long stick of it, so we ended up having to cut it on the ground because the workbench was not long enough to hold the end piece. But we got the main shape cut out, and then I dove into helping Josue get ready to start on his project. So we needed to get the radiator out of the way, so that way we could get the fuel cell out, so that way he could start measuring and building the box. So I tasked him with building the general box, at least getting the pieces cut out and figured out. Now, where the fuel cell is going to mount is going to be pretty dependent on where the diff is. So I wanted to do some final adjustment and verify that we had the diff where we wanted it before we started building this mount, because if we needed to move the diff, say, up after the fact, it might run into a clearance issue with the fuel cell. So with that done, I moved back to my transmission mount, started marking out my holes that bolt it to the transmission itself. So really the most important holes that are precise and already in a fixed location, and then started drilling those out. So drilling through some thick steel is always fun, but pro tip, if you're ever drilling through steel, drill slow. I have to tell all of my friends this. They all want to drill too fast. Drill slow and you will go faster, I promise you, and you will save your bits. Your bit shouldn't be that hot when you take it off. So once we got the holes done, we needed a way to get the bolts in the holes. So we needed to cut out basically a big opening on the top or bottom, depending on how you're looking at it, for us to fit the bolt in. So the easiest way to do that, since this was so thick, I was not trying to drill through it with the step bit, was to cut it out with the plasma cutter and then come back with the carbide burst. So we cut out the holes for there, and then we also notched the end, because with the 45 there wasn't really enough room to fit a big flange head bolt, so we notched the ends there just a little bit. That way it'd give us enough clearance to get a bolt in there. So then we went ahead and drilled our mounting holes. So these are what are going to bolt into the chassis. So again, these aren't a fixed location, they're wherever we want them to be. We'll put it in place, we'll drill it through the chassis. We're not trying to line up to any pre-existing holes, so that's nice. We can get them where we want them. So with that done, we can start cleaning it up. This thing's got a ton of mill scale, a ton of rust, so I wanted to get it cleaned up real nice. Even if I'm not going to TIG weld on something, I like to bring it down to shiny bright metal if I can. It's more satisfying to work with, seeing a fresh piece of steel that's all clean and shiny me than a rusty mill scaly one. So with that done, the trans mount itself, the physical mount, is pretty much done. So I jumped back to helping Josue. I went ahead and tacked the box together. We went to test fit it, and it wasn't quite square. It's a tough thing to build for because the fuel cell isn't square, but it was just a little too far out for us to be able to make it work. So we needed to cut it apart, build another piece, try to square it up a little better, and we got it to fit okay. We double checked it, test fitted it again. We're happy with it. It was good enough, so it was time to go ahead and weld it out. So I decided to TIG weld this just because I wanted to keep the bead profile as small as possible. That was really important because this needs to be a very compact package. We're fitting this in a relatively tight space, so I wanted to just make it cleaner, make it simpler, and TIG weld it. When you MIG weld something, you're just guaranteed to add a lot of material on top with your weld bead, whereas TIG welding, you can keep that bead profile pretty low. So that's why I decided to TIG weld it. It's always good to get some good practice. It was a pretty easy thing to weld out, just a simple box. So one of the things we ran into was the bolts. Now we knew this was going to be a problem. We weren't sure how we were going to tackle it, but the bolts on the fuel cell flange were going to get in the way. So Sway came up with the idea to basically weld the same bar stock in, which would space the main frame down enough to clear the bolts all the way around. So we got those tacked in, we double checked it, test fitted it, it worked, so we went ahead and welded those out, and with all that done, the main box is pretty much complete. We're done welding out the main box, and that's the base of what we're going to be working with from here on out on the fuel cell mounting. All right, transmission mount is fitting pretty solid. It's a little tricky because where it's landing, they slope. So it's not flat. So no matter what I do, it's not going to be flat. But with the trans where we want it, we got about a 1/4 inch gap. So we can easily do a shim there. I wanted to make sure this was maybe a touch low, if anything, so we could easily shim it up between the mount and the trans, as opposed to shimming it down between the mount and the body. Worked out perfect. We're a little bit low right now. We've got wiggle room either way, however we want to dial it in. So bolted up to the trans, no problem. Obviously, I'm going to get some flange head bolts for here. So we're just going to drill through here, basically. And then on the top, as much as it's going to suck to grind the paint back, we'll grind the paint back and we'll weld a nut to a plate and weld the plate in here. So we'll have a big welded plate, reinforced, nut welded to that, and then the bolt will bolt in. Those two bolts will bolt into that. That is some super thick material. It's like 3/16 thick, so super stout. Honestly, worked out really well. It's pretty much the easiest trans mount I've ever built. Granted, we're not done yet. We still got to make the plates with the nuts, but we're getting there. So the fuel cell tank mount basket is complete. So we had to do this. We had to space it up because of the bolts. We were going to do holes in here originally, but the bolts are so tight to the body of the cell that we'd have to literally cut the wall off, because the nut is literally right there. So this way we can still take this off, the top off if we wanted to, in the car while it's in the basket. So we're letting that cool down. We're gonna test fit it one more time, make sure it's still good after welding it. But yeah, so I never like to leave off with unfinished projects. I usually like to try to get to a good stopping point, get the projects done. But let me turn this light off. This thing is a beast. This Milwaukee Rover light. Oh, I've had it on all day, and I don't think I put a fresh battery in it. But we unfortunately, good and bad, we bounced around a lot. You know, we bounced between the accessory drive, the trans in and out, fuel cell, radiator. We kind of popped back and forth between a bunch of different things, so we didn't really get any one thing done. Excuses, but point is, you know what I'm getting at. I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. We'll pick this back up tomorrow and finish out the trans mount, finish out the fuel cell mount, get that mounted in. We have the stuff to do to index the bell housing and put the throw-up bearing in and get that all official so we can pull this back out, do all that, put it back in, and hopefully it doesn't have to come back out, in theory, unless there's something that unforeseen that happens. So lots more progress to make. Really happy to have this figured out. Really happy to have the trans mount. We're getting there. We're getting there. You can see all the frost from me opening the door after having the AC on all day. So anyway, I'm going to quit jibber jabbering. I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.